Good morning again, Jim. Nice to see you here. We appreciate you coming down to talk with us today. If you could open up with 2 or 3 minute background on yourself, kind of an opening remark, we'd appreciate it. And then from there, we'll move through a series of questions.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for allowing me to interview for the Game and Fish Commissioner opening. I believe it's probably one of the most important positions in our state as far as I see. I'm a lifelong Arizonan. I was born in Winslow. My dad worked for the phone company, so we moved around quite a bit in northern Arizona. We lived in Flagstaff, Page, Las Vegas, Show Low Lakeside, and then finally settled in Kingman. I started first grade there, and we've been there ever since. I graduated from Kingman High School, came down to the Valley, graduated from Phoenix College, and then transferred to ASU where I got a degree in business. At that point in time, my family had started a private family business up in Kingman, and I went back and helped them run that for about 30 plus years. Now I actually work in Baghdad, one of the hunting hotbeds of Arizona, in case any of you haven't been there. Everyone that works in Baghdad is a hunter, it seems like. Over the years, I've been able to give back to my community. I served over 5 years on the Kingman City Planning and Zoning Commission, and I currently sit on a WAVE JTED school board, which covers Kingman, Bullhead City, Lake Havasu, and Parker. These are things that I feel are very important because they indicate to me that I was given a chance through the junior college system to go to college when I would have never been able to afford to otherwise. So I've always been a big JTED community college type of guy. I think it gives our underprivileged kids that don't have a lot of money a chance that they wouldn't have had otherwise. As far as hunting, I came from pioneer families in northern Arizona. My great uncle was Butch Cassidy from Utah. My mom grew up in Fredonia. I learned how to track animals at a young age. I think they put a BB gun in my hand when I was 4, and I was told to make good with it. You only get 3 BBs. So from there, I advanced to doing a lot of predator hunting, and then I've actually taken big game animals with everything you can think of: a bow, a muzzleloader, a pistol, and a rifle. I feel like I have the ear of the hunters in my area. I've been able to meet a lot of people in the hunting circles. I've actually worked as a guide in New Mexico for Bucks and Bulls Outfitters, guiding antelope and elk on private ranches over in northern New Mexico for the last 20 plus years. I know a lot of people down in the legislature. I've been fortunate enough to meet them. I kind of feel like I would be an addition to the commission because I could get some things done. I know how to make people listen. I know how to go about it, and I would just be thankful for the opportunity if given one. And after that, I'm open for any questions you might have.
Great. Thanks, Jim, for those opening comments. I think we'll start this round of questions off with Ms. Chilton.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, yes. Could you describe your view of how the interface between the federal government and the state government in terms of wildlife control and management through habitat or endangered species affects the population that we have here? Wildlife population.
Well, first off, I can give you some really good points on the burro population over in northwest Arizona. I think that's a prime example. The federal government had decided that the burros were off limits for hunting, which is fine, but they kind of came up with a number, carrying capacity for particular areas, and they decided to construct corrals and things that would save our springs and our waters, and then they kind of just stopped all their programs. They were gonna round them up once a year. They were gonna adopt these burros out, and then they ran out of money, and then the burros, which proliferate quite quickly. They actually just ran us out of house and home. As far as the sheep populations go in northwestern Arizona, they're fighting tooth and nail for habitat. And I think that the federal government needs to rethink their ideas, and they need to give that back to our state, or relinquish it to the state, or the state should take it back, so that we can get back on track with carrying capacities and habitat control. I don't see any way possible that we're going to allow this situation up there to continue, because the sheep are going to get ran out. They're already having a hard time, and the burros are everywhere. And so when one comes up gone, missing, or somebody decides to whack one, which there's always going to be people like that, but then it's a huge travesty, and it becomes a national occurrence. I mean, we hear about it media-wise everywhere, but it's all because whoever was thinking this out to begin with didn't do a very good job and didn't keep track of it.
Thank you very much. I do not yet have a follow-up. Thank you.
Jim, my first question for you this morning is, do you feel having an education and public relations program for the public so they understand who and how we manage wildlife is important?
Absolutely. I think that's probably one of the things that we as a Game and Fish Commission need to look at prolifically. We need to make sure that we educate our people. We do public relations. There's so many people out there that don't know what's going on. They don't use a computer. They're living 20 years ago. So if they can't get online and look at it, they don't really know what's going on. Like when you guys have the expo down here in March, I can't tell you how many people in Kingman didn't know anything about it. They're like, what's that? I never heard about it. It's all about getting the word out. It's something that's so needed that I don't know how we could get away from not doing it. I think it's very important.
If you were appointed to be our next commissioner, what changes would you make then as a commissioner with the department to increase public awareness?
I would try to hold some public forums, but I think that doesn't get very much activity. It seems like every time they have a big game and fish meeting in our area, 3 people show up. So I think you're going to have to think outside the box, maybe have a different type of venue, maybe have something at the fairgrounds where you kind of say, invite some gun show guys to come, and then you have the game and fish in conjunction with that. Not partnering with them, but maybe as a sideline, that's how you're going to get people to come and see what's going on. If you just hold a meeting in the District 3, Region 3 office, that's not working. We're getting 6, 5 people up there. No, it's like nobody wants to do that. They all want to hunt, they all want to fish, but that's not working. So I think we're going to have to think outside the box as far as how we can get people to show up. How do we get their attention? There might maybe some giveaways, maybe some stuff like that, which I'm sure we could get donors. My wife sits on the North American Hunting Caucus for the United States. She's part of that, and she actually goes to these meetings. She's in one right now in Georgia, and they give away a lot of stuff, but they get all these guys to sponsor it. They get all the big gun guys and the clothing camouflage people, the sportsman's optics people. They get them to give away stuff, and so I think that's a way that you can lure people in and then educate them as you're doing it. I don't think anyone's going to want to just come to a meeting. They think that's like taking castor oil down. It's like, it's just a meeting, But if you can get people to show up for something that they think they might be able to receive, I think that's a way to do it.
Thank you, appreciate it. Rich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, Jim. Thank you for your interest in being on the commission. Thank you for coming. Jim, please describe the North American model of wildlife conservation and how it relates to the Arizona Game and Fish Commission and the Arizona Game and Fish Department.
I would say that the model to me is that Teddy Roosevelt kind of started it. He wanted to keep the future of hunting alive, so he was all about conservation. He was going to set aside land, keep places for these animals to live, so that our future hunters would have a place to go and have animals to hunt. He was here in an era when if you needed meat, you went out and shot whatever you needed, and then you might extinguish that species. So bighorn sheep's a good analogy. The miners, when they were easy to hunt, they shot them out to almost nothing. The elk herd the same way. So that was the model that he came up with. He was going to try to preserve that. I think the Game and Fish has been handed the torch, and the Game and Fish Commission, or the Game and Fish of Arizona, they're trying to keep that up, but it's a kind of a losing battle when you get 2 non-hunters per 1 hunter. So as far as how do we keep that going, we have to educate. We need to make sure that everybody understands the importance of preserving this heritage. And by doing that, we're gonna have to send out a lot of PR stuff. You're gonna have to probably hire some more people through the department to just work in that capacity. I don't think we have enough people now. So that means going to the legislature and saying, hey, we need more money. And we can't fund ourselves just by selling tags. We need you guys to fork over some money so that we can do these things that we need to do. Otherwise, we're gonna be fighting a battle that we may not be able to win. I think it's very important, and we're at a crossroads right now in order to accomplish that.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Pat?
Morning, how are you today?
Good, thank you, sir.
Bear chase, along with the North American model for wildlife conservation, should be the 2 backbones of hunting in our nation and state. Tell me why this statement is accurate and your views of these 2 items, fair chase and the North American model.
Thank you very much for that question. That's one of my favorite ones. Okay, so fair chase to me is we got to start looking at some of the things that are getting out of whack. We got guns that you can shoot an animal at 1,200 yards. You've got a muzzleloader that reaches out to 400 yards. We got scopes that kick out to 1,200 yards. To me, fair chase is to give that animal a chance. Hunting is not about killing. Hunting is about somebody being able to go out and have a good time, whether they harvest an animal or not. They need to experience the outdoors. They need to experience the actual experience, not just to go kill something. That's not going to make you successful. So fair chase to me is, let's get rid of some of these game cameras. You go up on the strip, I just got back from there last week, and every water hole, because it's dry up there right now, every water hole's got 4 or 5 cameras on it, some 10 to 15 cameras. I think we need to limit that, maybe adopt something like Nevada has, where August 1st, all the cameras go away if it's on public land. That's one thing. The other thing I think we need to look at is, if you're gonna have a muzzleloader that shoots 400 yards, that's fine. Let's take the scope off of it. You guys can't have a scope, because in Nevada, that's how it is. You go up there, you hunt with just the gun, you don't have the scope. That'll take care of itself. Things like that we need to look at, though. I think as far as fair chase goes, we're getting out of whack. We're getting too many innovations for the animal. The animal is still the animal. The animal's still trying to survive also. But as far as we're concerned as hunters, I think we all need to step back, take a look at ourselves and say, is this fair? I don't think it's fair.
Any follow-up question, Pat?
Do you have any comment on the North American model, or the North American model for conservation?
I just believe that the North American model for conservation is well thought out. As far as when they first came up with it, it's okay. You know, this was a great idea. I just think it needs to be tweaked a little bit. As far as the world changes every day, when we see all these new changes coming in, then we're going to have to make some changes. I don't want to disrupt the model. I want to keep it intact as far as we can, but I don't want to have things happening that we're not going to be able to subsist with. We're going to have to step back and take a look at it and say, hey, wait a minute, what can we do to make this what we really intended it to be?
Thank you.
Bill?
Yes, thank you for being here today, Mr. Cable. My question, you touched on a little bit, but I'd like to expand on it. Wildlife conservation in Arizona is not paid for with general tax dollars. How familiar are you with the department and the commission's efforts to generate discretionary revenue and to keep up with the increases in wildlife management costs? And can you name any of these efforts?
I'm not real familiar with it. I do know that we need to try to come up with different revenue sources as far as, like I said before, maybe go to the legislature and come up with some specific funding for the department other than just relying on our tags and our big game hunts, like our auction tags, things like that. I think that it's important that we figure out a way to fund the department in order to keep the department going. I don't know how we can exist by just relying on these tags to pay our way. I think that you need to probably come up with some ways that are going to be a little bit outside the box. Maybe raise fees. Maybe say, hey, look, you know what? Out-of-state hunters, you know, we try to keep it on an even keel with the other states, but maybe it's going to have to get bumped up. I know when I go to Nevada, I pay $1,200 for an out-of-state elk tag, but I don't know what the fee is for Arizona for a hunter from Nevada. Things like that. Maybe I'm sure that's been looked at, but I think we're going to have to get down to, hey, how do we compete with these guys? How are we going to fund ourselves? I mean, you can't rely on just selling tags. A lot of the hunters that come to me say, I don't want to hunt. There's no animals. They sold all these tags and I can't find a deer. I'd rather not have a tag for 4 or 5 years with the hope that there's going to be more animals. Well, biologically that may work, it may not. If we get rain, if we do predator control, yeah, we might have more animals, but to just think that not buying tags or not getting picked for a tag is going to help you down the road, I don't know if that's true or not. We need to look at things like that, though. Maybe we're selling too many tags. Maybe we're not giving that guy a real fair chance, even though it's an opportunity, which I know they say that a lot. Maybe we need to think about how we can do this and make it more of a quality experience. I know our units up north are managed more for trophy type aspects. I know you're not supposed to use the word trophy anymore, but that type of an animal, maybe we can step back and say, well, maybe we increase the fees a little bit, maybe we drop a few of the tags back, and maybe we have a few more auction tags that we sell. Things like that, I think, are going to have to be something we look at.
Mr. Chairman. Yes, and thank you very much for being present. I didn't do a follow-up to my first question, so it's kind of, this is more. I was very impressed with your answer to my question, the portion that we did get to discuss. Your familiarity is with that Mojave County area, and with what other areas of Arizona are you pretty familiar with the issues, and are you familiar with the issues on the border in south, say the Yuma County, Santa Cruz, Cochise, those border areas? Can you discuss what you might have as experience or knowledge about the interface between wildlife management and the issues that we face on the southern border?
I don't have a whole lot of knowledge on the southern border. I've only been hunting down there once or twice in my life, so I don't know a whole lot about that. But I could sure research it. I know enough people that do hunt down there that I could sure find out what it is. I'm not going to say I know. I do know a lot about the northern Arizona units 9 and 10. I've actually worked for the Big Boquillas Ranch as an ambassador for them with their hunt program. That's where I drive around and check people if they have their hunt permits, if they need to know information on where they might want to go to be successful on their hunts, because they're actually having a problem with the elk eating all the feed for their cattle. So they actually want these guys to be successful. They're not just selling them a tag. I know those areas really well. I know the areas around Flagstaff really well, but I don't know the southern border areas very well. But I'd sure be willing to learn.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your fine job of answering questions, and you're not just giving us a line, you're giving us some facts, and thank you.
Okay, my second question for you this morning, how do you see social issues impacting scientific wildlife management?
Well, that's a good question too, because one of the things that bothers me the most is when somebody puts a bunch of pictures on Facebook. So as far as social media goes, if that answers your social question, I also realize that could be what's right and what's wrong with killing an animal. Socially, it seems like when I was a kid in Arizona, everybody hunted. There was no question about that. But now it's gotten to the point where, well, everybody might hunt in the rural areas, but some of the people in Phoenix and Tucson, socially, that's unacceptable, just to kill an animal. I know one thing, as a coyote hunter from way back when, if you've got your little fluffy poodle out on the porch, and those coyotes are really cool, but that morning you walk out to check on your poodle and that coyote's carrying it off in its mouth, they don't become cool anymore. But that's one of the problems we face. People don't realize what some of these coyotes and cats and predators are capable of doing. So I think that's an issue that also needs a lot of education, and I don't know how you can even educate some people because they won't go for it. They don't want to hear it. So it's a tough deal. The Facebook deal I think is horrible. I hate that anybody would kill an animal and put it on Facebook and then advertise it to everybody. I think that's one of the worst things that we as hunters can do. I think that's a terrible thing, and I would hope that could be something that could be relayed and conveyed to some of our younger kids and stuff that want to do that all the time, because it becomes more of an ego thing. It's not about the hunt. It's about, look what I got. But they don't realize that look is being shared by millions of people. And now it's like, oh my God, look at this. That's one of the things I think that got our predator hunts in trouble, was when they threw 15 dead animals in the back of a truck and took pictures of it and advertised it to everybody. I see that as a very important issue, though, socially, versus the hunt aspect.
Thanks, Jim, appreciate it. Rich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What is the R3 movement, and why is it important to the future of the Arizona Game and Fish Department?
The R3 movement, I do not know.
No following, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. As we discussed earlier, fair chase and the North American model, what would happen if either of these concepts are not maintained as core values to hunters?
Well, I believe if they aren't maintained as core values to hunters, that hunting will come to an end at some point. I think that if we cannot keep that alive and keep that moving into the future, then our future as hunters will probably dissipate away. I think if people don't keep that those values in mind, they don't have any concept of what they're doing. They're just going to be a bunch of guys running around shooting guns, and there's no right, wrong, or indifference. It's going to come to an end. So I think that in order to maintain that, we really need to educate the public, because a lot of kids and stuff don't know what that even stands for. They just think you go get a hunting license and go hunting. They don't have any idea what that means.
Thank you.
Bill?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Linda, I'm going to take a liberty here because we did get a letter this morning, and I'm assuming it was targeted at you. So I want to give you a chance to respond to it. Basically, it says that we consider this it a conflict of interest for licensed hunting guides to serve as a guiding member of the Arizona Game and Fish Commission. And you mentioned that you're a guide. I think you mentioned mostly in New Mexico. But I want to give you you're not a licensed guide?
I'm not a licensed guide in Arizona.
Okay.
I am a sub-guide in New Mexico, because New Mexico this last year passed a law that said that you couldn't guide hunters on a private ranch unless you were a sub-guide. And so we had to go over and take a 100-question test and pay them a fee, which I believe that was really what they wanted, but that's what we had to do just to be.
They got to pay for it somehow.
Yeah. So I'm not a licensed guide in Arizona.
Okay, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that.
I've never taken a dime as a guide in Arizona.
Okay, thank you.
I went on a lot of hunts and helped guys, but I'm just to help them. I'm not taking money for it.
Okay, do any of the other board members got any more questions for Jim? Okay, at this point, if you could give us a little 2 or 3 minute wrap up.
Once again, I want to thank you guys for the opportunity for me to interview. We haven't had a commissioner out of the Kingman Region 3, District 3, and I think since Mr. Johnson was there like back in the 60s. I think we had Larry Adams in the 80s. I just would hope that you guys could try to give us a chance, because I don't think we've had a real big voice in things that go on with the Game and Fish Commissioners in the past several years. As a commissioner, I guarantee you, you won't get anybody that won't work any harder than me. I'll do my job. If I don't know something like the question you asked me about, I'll look it up. I'll find out. I'll get to the core of it. I don't know everything. I apologize for that. I try to learn. I try to do whatever I can to be kept up on things. But I would hope that you guys would give us a chance to have a voice from our neck of the woods. And I'm not just talking about Mojave County, because I actually work in Baghdad for the mine there. And so I see a lot of hunters there, and I work up on the Boquillas as a volunteer. I see a lot of hunters from the Flagstaff and Prescott areas there, so I do cover a lot of ground. I know a lot of people on the Strip. My family's from up there. I run into them quite often, so I think I'm qualified to do this job. I would hope you would give me the chance to do it, but I think that there's probably several other good applicants that are applying also. So it's probably going to be a tough choice for you guys. But I appreciate the opportunity, and I know you'll do a good job. And I want you guys to all be aware that one of the most important organizations there is the Arizona Desert Sheep Society. And thank Mr. Kelly for his work there, because that is to me is one of the most important organizations that we have. So thank you.
Thanks for coming in today, Jim. We appreciate it. Okay, looks like next up we have Todd Geiler. Morning. Welcome, Todd. We're going to give you about 30 minutes for your interview this morning, and if you could start off with a little 2 or 3 minute background on yourself, and then we'll do a series of 2 questions, and then at the conclusion we'll give you a few minutes to do a follow-up.
Okay, sure, you bet. I'm Todd Geiler, and I appreciate the opportunity to come down here and talk to you guys today. I was told by Ms. Leavenworth that if there were any omissions that needed to be amended on the resume you have before you, that this was the time to do that. I believe my qualifications as a prospective commissioner are listed in that resume. The only omission that's in that resume would be my competitive shooting background. I started out as a small bore rifle shooter and then worked my way up. In '79 began shooting international pistol, and in '82 was lucky enough to shoot my way onto the U.S. National Developmental Team, which set a springboard for me for the 9th Pan American Team in Caracas, and then the Benito Juarez Games in Mexico City. That was just the launch pad that I didn't get added into that resume. People have been asking me why I would want to be a commissioner. I think it's a pretty simple answer when what I consider to be a diamond in Arizona state government with this department. Arizona Game and Fish is a dynamic agency, and there's a lot of good in that. When you look at the phenomenal successes, the commission and department have seen since 1900 with our application of conservation principles and those principles and how the wildlife responded since 1900. And I just got done with elk hunting and deer hunting this last couple weeks. The success of the conservation models we have in 2019 is mind-numbing, and the model applies to all non-game and game species. This is a dynamic agency and it's a fluid agency, and by that I mean that the agency is able to recognize concerns and challenges as it comes before the department. You have declining license sales across the nation, but in Arizona we're fortunate to have a little bit of a spike up in that. We have concerns with wolf reintroductions. We have the Forest Service and Department of Interior concerns that come before you, but and the good part of that is that recognizing these issues, you have the HPC programs that have come out. The department has a whole lot of different small little things they keep working at, but at the end of the day, when all the small stuff gets added up, you have a pyramid that makes a department the absolute diamond that it is. Whether or not you're looking at ridge-nosed rattlesnakes in Cochise County or deer in Yavapai County, I think Arizona Game and Fish is the agency to be part of. It's big business. It's one of those things where there's a lot of things coming up in the future. There's going to be exciting. And I think as we get closer and closer with the new population growths and changes we see here, there's several issues that I want to be a part of. So that's why I'm standing before you.
Great, Todd, we appreciate that opening comments. I'll kick off the round of questions. My first one for you is, do you feel having an education and public relations program for the public so they understand who and how we manage wildlife is important?
Most definitely. When you start looking at the way our state's changing, with Maricopa and Pima County being the major population hubs and centers, we've got to look at different ways to step into these counties, because the majority of those, depending on which study you look at, 80% don't know where funding for conservation comes from. We need to look at that education aspect of it through your Conserve and Protect programs that we've got going. And as we bring those people forward, then they can understand the funding and how we're preserving the wildlife for everyone in Arizona.
I guess my follow-up for you then would be is, if you were appointed as our next commissioner, what do you think the commission and department can do to expand their education programs?
I think the education programs, you already have a good solid bedrock at this point. I think when you get looking down the line, it's going to take hands-on, like some of the fishing programs that we've done there in the greater Prescott area. We specifically targeted kids that just have no idea what a hunting license or a fishing license is. And then through the process, we've educated them about the dollar for dollar input back into what they were experiencing. And with that came the education. And it was an all-encompassing thing. It helped the department, but more importantly, it educated the youth. And hopefully we can have license retention down the line with that.
Thank you very much. Rich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for your interest in the Arizona Game and Fish Commission.
Thank you.
If you would, please describe the North American model of wildlife conservation and how it relates to the Arizona Game and Fish Commission and the Arizona Game and Fish Department.
I think the North American model is the absolute pillar for this department. Without that model, the model is what's going to guide us through the upcoming concerns and challenges we have. The wildlife in our state is held in a public trust, and that's for everybody, whether you're in Phoenix or in Prescott or Page. The model itself has time and again proven to be the very best base for forward thinking here in the state. When you look at circa 1900 with what we had with subsistence, hunting, I mean, all you have to do is look out there in the lobby. We brought 86 elk in and dropped them off on Chevelon Canyon, and look at what we have today. If there wasn't a better flagship for what that model represents, that full body mount elk is it.
With that comes the fair chase aspect of it, and they're like a hand in a glove. I hope that answered everything.
You did, thank you. Have no fun.
Thanks, Rich. Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What would happen if either the concepts of fair chase and the North American model would not be maintained as core truths and values for hunters?
The entire system, pardon me, the entire system, in my opinion, would collapse. The fair chase, I mean, by its very definition, the animal has to have the ability to elude the hunter in its natural habitat. The North American model with George Grinnell and Teddy Roosevelt, the way they started to champion that entire concept, the genesis of the entire model, the two of them are, like I said, a hand in a glove. Without one, you can't have the other. You can regulate the subsistence hunting like what we did, but in the process of that, we also regulated ourselves and started to see the recovery of the different species. And it doesn't have to be a game species. It doesn't have to be a non-game species. It's all species within our borders. So you have to have the North American model, and you have to have the fair chase, because one doesn't exist without the other.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today, Dr. Geiler. You talked a little bit about this, but I'd like to expand on it. Wildlife conservation is not paid for in Arizona with general tax dollars. How familiar are you with the department and commission's efforts to generate discretionary revenue to keep up with the increases in wildlife management costs? And also, can you name any of these efforts?
The cost of managing wildlife is an expensive business. The department has taken on several different challenges in that vein. The part of the discretionary funds that I think you're speaking to are like our current point guard that we have put in place. I believe if my homework is correct, we raised in excess of $500,000 last year with that. There's some different thoughts that I've been hearing through the grapevine about having different costs for different points in point guard. That's another way to raise money, whether everybody knows a javelina tag's a javelina tag, unless you're at my house and then you don't watch opening football on the first of the year, you go pig hunting. But a pig tag for point guard versus a sheep tag, there's an intrinsic value in that, protecting that point for sheep. And I think a higher dollar for the point guard for sheep and elk versus a javelina is something the department could look at to raise additional funds. Likewise, we have the water texting for wildlife, and that's another option that through our conserve and protect question that the chair asked. If we market those to the non-hunting public in that vein, you also educate them where the dollars are coming from for habitat conservation and preservation. So those are a couple different things. You also have the logo of Game and Fish that you can put on different products and work out different discounts for the license holders and sportsmen in the state, but at the same time, the department could reap a certain percentage for the sale of those items. It doesn't have to be just a cool cup to keep your Diet Coke, cold in June at commission meetings, but you could also have something that for, spare tire covers for Jeeps or something like that would go on ahead and generate an additional fund. But as long as it was a visible thing, in my opinion, at that point, you would also be making people think about just what the department does as a whole.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Chilton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being present.
Thank you.
In the course of what you've mentioned, you have touched on some of the issue that is of concern to me, and that is the interface between the responsibilities of the Arizona Game and Fish Commission for the management of wildlife and the work done by the federal government to reestablish certain species, and then the resulting interface between the federal government's role and the state's management efforts. And that affects conservation, it affects wildlife use, and it affects all of us because there's an interplay between the powers of the one and the rights and responsibilities of the other. Can you discuss those a bit and perhaps give us any specifics you might know on the subject?
That's a big question. It's more than a big question. Everybody else is playing nice until now. It doesn't matter, ma'am, whether we're talking about the Condor project that we have going on here in the state or the reintroduction of the wolf species. The problem that we're going to have is keeping an open dialogue between the agencies. We have 131 Sonoran wolves loose and wild here in Arizona, but there are entities that want to have no wolves, and I can understand that, but the problem with that is that they're here and the genie's out of the bottle, and we're going to have to deal with it as a department. We're going to have to deal with it as a state. There are some folks over in New Mexico that have not, at the risk of throwing a rock in a glass house, been as proactive as what the Arizona Game and Fish Department and their counterparts in Arizona have done. When you look at the way the Gila National Forest and some of those outlying forests have not kept up their timber management guidelines as put forth by the Department of Interior and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they just got shut down for all timber thinning because of the spotted owl. Thank goodness Arizona, with the ABARS, the Coconino, the Prescott, and the Kaibab, there has been a dialogue between the forests, and to a certain extent the department has been an active participant, maintaining that the requirements and the metrics that were in place and were asked have been maintained, so we don't have our timber thinning project shut down. The wolf, I don't know all the specifics to it, but it's one of those things where some folks want 5,000, some folks want 10,000 animals in the area. The management guidelines early on said 300, and that's an appropriate number. In looking at the total number of animals that you have in Mexico, 20 is what they have. That's not an active participant in our management. The management guidelines are going to have to be open for everybody, but there's going to have to be very real and very set numbers that are going to be out and allowed to run in our state, because you're putting a top tier predator on par with the mountain lion, and that's, I consider, to be the top tier predator in our state. We've already watched this happen in Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, where they let the numbers get too high, and all we have, I followed a bunch of mountain lion research back in the 90s and the 80s when I was in grad school. The Hornknocker Institute had a wonderful mountain lion project, but with the introduction of the wolf in the Yellowstone area, that entire 22-year longitudinal program came to an abrupt end when the wolf started preying on the mountain lions. So it's a very dynamic issue that you bring up, but the department needs to take the lead on that, because the department has wildlife managers out watching what the biomass consumption is for the predator species and the prey species, and it's all managed by the department. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife would love to come in and tell you what to do as a state agency. The feds are always the smart great-grandfather, but I think in this particular case, the commission needs to take the lead and and with foresight for a 2.5, 5, and 10-year program for reintroduction, push the director and the department as a whole looking down line to make sure that we don't end up in the same boat as what occurred up north of us. And that is a very long-winded statement, and I apologize.
Thank you very much for your statement, and I don't feel it was long-winded. I feel that you made a serious effort to address the issue. I do have a small follow-up, and that is, you've addressed the wolf quite nicely. What about the issues of critical habitat established by the federal government? And I'm thinking in specific of the jaguar, as that is also a species named as a species threat of extinction by the federal government. And could you discuss how the elements of critical habitat that were found in the finding of endangerment affect hunting opportunities and other recreation and productive activities on the southern border of Arizona?
The critical habitat issue down there is, it's first and foremost the jaguar. That whole thing has been a can of worms. The way the feds came in and labeled that as critical habitat, immediately it changes the dynamic in management for the department, because now we have to go on ahead and look at the animal as a whole. We don't have that many in the state, but the question that came to my mind when that labeling occurred was, is this truly critical habitat, or is this an expansion of a species? And if it's an expansion of a species, then they are going to move into marginal habitat areas just because of overpopulation. And I don't think at this point, we can't put our head in the dirt. We're going to have to look at those habitats down there in the Chiricahuas, and we're going to have to look around the Fort Huachuca area. The restrictions that we see put in there are again with the foresight that you and I have seen in the history of the department, but it's the critical habitat aspect. I'm used to running on the back of a horse, and I look at this and I'm going, this is an expansion of a species, and this is like having elk over in Kingman, Arizona. So in my opinion, I think the feds overstepped their boundaries a little bit. I don't know the specifics on how the department can weave their way through that designation, but the jaguar at this point, we don't even have any pairs that are even representing a viable propagation of the species. And I don't know if I answered your question or not, but
Yes,
that
you
was on
have,
my-
and
that was
thank
on
you
my
very
part.
much.
Okay, I apologize.
How about an easy one?
I'd like that.
My question for you, how do you see social issues impacting scientific wildlife management?
It's a train wreck. Social issues are typically visceral issues, and it's whether it's, and my town was centerpiece to that with the department having to deal with coyote hunting contests. Social media went on ahead and took photos that we had up there of a group of guys that were just out chasing coyotes and thought it'd be a good idea. Their intention was well, but what ended up happening was we had an absolute PR disaster for the state and the department. I think the sportsman, I should back up. I think that the hunter needs to realize that they are a sportsman, and a sportsman, in my opinion, is somebody that is following a set in concrete set of ethics.
And with those ethics, you have to be looking at the way the public is going to perceive your actions. So when you start to go into the field and you do these things, I'll be quite honest with you, my wife and I, the best thing on a Saturday morning is to pull on our camo, grab a 22-250 and our varmint calls and head out to the boonies. And we will chase those coyotes around in circles and circles and circles. But the thing of it is that when we're doing it, we're not out there throwing the animal on the roof of the truck. You got to think we have to start evolving a little bit as we embrace that fair chase in the North American model and realize that we're not only trying to preserve a species, but we're also looking at our own reflection, and we want that reflection to be positive and something that people will want to join instead of tear down.
Thank you for that answer. Yep. Rich?
Another short one for you. What is the R3 movement, and why is it important to the future of the Arizona Game and Fish Department?
The R3 movement, I will have to defer on that because I have no idea. I will have to read up on that.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A major key to having an effective 5-member commission is having every member attend and participate in commission meetings. Given your current occupation and other obligations, are you able to fulfill this tremendous commitment of time to serve as a commissioner? And please elaborate.
The last few years, I've had a nice little respite of no boards and no committees to be on in my area. So with the way that my office is set up and the way I have things currently, with the way my ducks are in a row, I have the time and the commitment for the state is paying it forward. My wife and I believe in the youth, and as such, a lot of our activities are focused on youth in our community. And with this particular step out into the public domain, the effort would be to not only make sure I was available, but make sure I was available with an eye on our past, but also looking at the future for the department. So yes, I would be available.
Thank you. No follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Pat. Phil?
I want to know how you have not any boards and activities to be involved in your community, because you've been involved in the past. I need some lessons. You kind of touched on this earlier, but I'd like to expand on a little more. Arizona's become a highly urbanized state, and with urbanization, there's fewer and fewer people involved in outdoor activities, specifically sportsman activities, hunting, fishing, hiking, those types of things. Do you have any ideas how we deal with this as we move into more urbanization to keep people involved and aware of the outdoor activities and the need to properly fund and maintain our wildlife?
That's going to take me back to when I was on a board. When I got thinking about that as I was preparing for this, when I was on the board for our local Kiwanis Club, we were just messing around and spitballing with the city manager and the city parks and rec gentleman there in town. And it was very quietly I started realizing how many kids in Prescott didn't know about the very salient points you just brought up. The reason that we started that fishing program up there in Prescott was the Kiwanis Club was happy because they were getting their name out there, but that wasn't the real true gem of the whole program. With Tom Finley up in Kingman at the time, and then he had Jeffrey Rabinowitz, I believe was the fishery gentleman's name. We ended up looking at doing this fishing day, but in the process of it, the first year was kind of a belly flop, but then we only had 700 kids the first year, but in the third year we had over 3,522 kids that participate in this program. And as it went hand in hand, with growth, we also brought in on the side the department, and the department's fisheries side brought in, their live tanks and let all the kids look and see what a Gila trout was, what a rainbow trout was, the whole 9 yards. But at the process, no kid left that event without a handout or two about what a fishing license, what a dollar does for the state and for the department conserving and protecting wildlife. We also brought up at that point how many species of wildlife we had in Arizona, which I caught a lot of flack on because everybody thought I pulled that out of the sky. But at the time, it was the truth. And nobody could believe that we had that many animals living in our state. So there are a lot of ways for the urban, areas to start tapping into those kids. I think with some of the things that they used to do in the old days, I don't know if they're still doing it, but every now and then we would have, and I'm thinking just straight about my wife being a first grade teacher, but we would bring in, with some of these kids that she had, they went out there to Chino Valley to this raptor experience, and this is the dangest thing I've ever seen in my life. But there's a guy in Chino Valley that has all these birds of prey, and the kids that went in there had never seen a hawk except sitting on a telephone pole while their parents went by at 60 miles an hour. In this particular situation, the kids got to come up and see a Eurasian eagle owl. They got to see a barn owl. They got to see a great horned owl. They were able to go on ahead and have a one-on-one experience with the owners of the outfit, and at the same time we were seeing quietly some of the stuff through the department doing the same type scenarios. If we go into the future and look at the urbanization, especially with the way the things are changing in the state now, and let these young people, they don't have to be grade school. If you get the high schoolers that can remember something beyond 10 minutes, that'd be a great thing. But they can actually see a tangible asset to it, and at that point, then they know how to step forward and participate in the system as a whole.
Okay, we're kind of borderline on time. Sue, have you got a Sue question or a little quicker one?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try to make it shorter. In that urbanization that my fellow board member here, Phil Townsend, brought up, it does increase population, but at the same time, the federal government decreases the amount of land accessible without restrictions. That is, it names wildlife corridors or names parks or monuments or whatever that have restrictive aspects. And then we have an increased population and a reduced area for wildlife activities, camping, hunting, fishing, and the rest of it. What do you see as a constructive way to deal with that?
My short answer would be, if there's a deer on it, hunt it. But that's not the right answer for the federal government. If they're going, when they came in and set up the Parashant National Monument, I have an Arizona guide's license. It's easily and readily accessible, but we thought that we were going to have an absolute train wreck up on the strip with access and issues. I can say without reservation, in that particular setting, the Department of Interior has been pretty easy to work with up there. As long as we leave a clean campsite and leave it like we found it, we don't have a problem, and the pursuit of the animal isn't an issue. But when you get closer down here to Phoenix, that's where we start to have our big issues. And with those designations, I think that there needs to be, and Representative Graval, I'm going to say it wrong, our representative from Yuma, Gravalva, thank you.
He's from Tucson, not Yuma.
Tucson, yeah, thank you. Thank you. I was thinking about my dad's sheep hunt coming up, so. But with him on the Natural Resource Committee, maybe there is an avenue there for us to make an inroad so that we can have some positive change for the future designations and access